Assalamu alaikum. I'm Dalia Mogahed and I direct research at the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding. Thank you so much for joining us for this important conversation about working together to foster mosques that are inclusive of half the population, women, and of course, we are now seeing how in phase 1 and phase 2 of opening back up across the country, mosques are beginning to host their first Jummah after the initial quarantine of COVID-19. And there are varying degrees of inclusivity in that process. Now, this webinar specifically is about mosques in general, not just now, but all the time, and how we can use a research-based approach to building mosques that are engaging and inclusive of our entire community. And I'm so excited to have this conversation, especially with the panel that we have assembled, Dr. Ingrid Mattson, Hind, Makki, and Joohi, Tahir. Now, I'm going to introduce our panelists a little bit more, but first I want to give you a little bit of background on the topic and on ISPU and the research that's going to be discussed in this webinar. So first, for those who are not familiar with ISPU, we are a research organization and our mission is to provide objective research and education about American Muslims to support well-informed dialogue and decision-making. We do that by doing 3 things. First, we do rigorous, relevant research on the American Muslim community. But we don't stop there. We also educate the public in both in-person and digital outreach. And then we equip. We focus on those who are making a difference in the real world, and we train them and we equip them with the right information so that they can do their work better with direct training, toolkits, and workshops. So why are we talking about mosques? Why is a research organization focused on the American Muslim community interested in helping mosques do a better job? The answer is because mosques matter. They matter in general, not just for obvious reasons that the masjid is where we gather, but we know that from research, frequent mosque attendance is linked to good things for society in general: more volunteerism, better mental health outcomes, and higher civic engagement. Yet oftentimes mosques are alienating to many people in our community, especially when it comes to women, converts, and young people. So why make mosques welcoming? What's in it for a mosque leader to even care about this topic? There are so many benefits besides just the moral imperative of making a mosque, removing obstacles to every single Muslim ability to engage with their community. When mosques are welcoming, you have more volunteers, more sustained donors. You have a cleaner facility. You have greater spiritual engagement in the congregation. You promote stronger communities. You provide sanctuaries for people in a very hostile environment right now. And it is a place for the next generation to understand who they are and how they can contribute to their communities. So to find answers about how to make mosques more inclusive and welcoming, ISPU set out and did a research project we researched this topic for more than 18 months. And our goal was to produce research-driven recommendations for mosques that are welcoming, inclusive, engaging, as well as hubs for hope, meaning they are service-oriented places that people can go to when they need help. We accomplished this through an extensive literature review, first of all, focus groups around the country with a cross-section of our community's demographic. We did surveys. We also analyzed every existing survey on American Muslims. We did one-on-one interviews. And we received advice from a diverse task force of experts, some of which are here with us as panelists. So what is available to you for free on our website is our report from this extensive study called Creating a Welcoming, Inclusive, Dynamic Mosque. But we also have, in addition to that report, we have several case studies that we built on the report for specific issues that mosques have to deal with. So everything from how to build a free clinic as a part of your mosque, to how to make it a place where civic engagement is fostered and increased. So all of these resources are open to you on our website at ispu.org/RMS. RMS is Reimagining Muslim Spaces. So I'm just going to go through very briefly some of the findings and the highlights of our research when it comes to women and when it comes to fostering inclusive spaces for women. And I start with this ayah just to set the stage. This is some context for the conversation we're going to have. This is an ayah from Surah At-Tawbah. The believing men and believing women are guardians of one another. They advocate virtue, forbid evil, perform the prayers, practice charity, and obey God and his messenger. These God will have compassion on them. God is noble and wise. And why I start with this ayah, it's a beautiful description of the proper relationship between men and women in Muslim community. But also that this specific ayah was in Surah At-Tawbah, and it was revealed at a time of crisis, a time where the Muslim community was literally experiencing an existential threat. So the idea or the argument that we can't talk about inclusivity or what women need because we are facing a crisis, that's often the response, is really addressed in this ayah, that it's precisely during a crisis, it's precisely when there's so much going on that is threatening the community, whether it's a pandemic or institutionalized racism or just the general Islamophobia that people are dealing with. It's precisely because there's so many challenges that the community has to be strong inside itself. So some facts from our research that are important to understand as we discuss the issue of inclusivity in the Muslim community. Muslim women are the most likely to suffer because of the 2016 election. So Islamophobia in general is not experienced equally generally across the community. Women do bear the brunt of Islamophobia. So whether it's suffering anxiety or fearing for one's safety, women are more likely than men to say that this is something that they've dealt with as a result of the 2016 election results. When it comes to religious discrimination, women more likely than men to say that they've experienced it in the year before. So 69% of women and 57% of men. It's something that impacts everyone, but women more than men. Women are also more likely to take action, though, as a result of the election or just hardship in general. So women, for example, are more likely to say that they increase their donation to an organization associated with their faith community as a result of the 2016 election. So these are the folks that are invested and committed to the betterment of the community, at least as much as men. And so this is not a group that, leadership in general should want to alienate. And then a really interesting piece of research here, I've always thought this was something worth noting, is that men and women actually report attending the mosque with similar frequency. It's not the exact same, but it is actually statistically similar. So in terms of weekly attendance, 45% of men and 35% of women say that they attend a religious service. Why this is important is because oftentimes mosques are set up based on certain assumptions in terms of who is coming and the frequency by which they are coming. So in many other parts of the world, in fact, in most parts of the world, when you actually look at data, women do attend the mosque much less frequently than men. But the United States is an interesting exception to that rule, where in America, and this isn't even the case in Western countries, but just in the United States, as far as I've seen in terms of the data, men and women attend the mosque at almost equal frequencies. And why that's important is because when you're thinking about the allocation of space, of resources, we should not be operating on models from different contexts. The model that we need to have in mind here is that both groups are attending at the same frequency, and the allocation of space and resources, therefore, should reflect that reality. Now, some of our focus group attendees really expressed this idea of what does it feel like when you go to a mosque and it feels good, it feels welcoming. And people would say things like, I hate the fact that I can't see the speaker. So the idea of visual access to the imam was very, very important to many people. It was also important for folks to see that women were represented in leadership. So we bring in here the opinion of the Fiqh Council of North America that said that we call upon masajid to ensure that women have access to the main musalla to perform salah, listen to the Jummah khutbah, and attend and participate in lectures or discussions. The Prophet ﷺ did not have a formal shura process, but he did set the example of consulting with segments of the Muslim community, including women. Masajid in North America, however, do have formal decision-making mechanisms, and it is therefore incumbent that women participate in all processes of formal shura, including serving on the governing bodies of masajid. So, creating an inclusive environment for women, two main recommendations. There are more in the report, but I just wanted to focus on these two for our discussion today. Women should have the choice to pray in the main musalla or in a separate area. So the key point about choice. And then women should always be given the opportunity to serve in leadership and be represented in the decision-making bodies of the masajid. So putting recommendations to the test, now that we've had some time since the research, we've actually helped masajid and communities implement some of the recommendations. There are many more in our research. I encourage you to check it out. And we've seen the results of when folks actually do implement these results, these recommendations. So we've had 2 investment sites that we've worked with, and we've done a pre and a post survey on the opinions of the congregants. And what we've seen is that there's overwhelmingly positive results of implementing these simple recommendations, and none of them cost money. They're all simply just a different approach to how you run the space and the culture of the masjid. So for one mosque in Michigan, the top areas of improvement were this agreement with these statements. The leaders in this masjid seem to care about me as a person. In this masjid, my opinion counts, and the mission of this masjid makes me feel my participation is important. And these improvements cut across age, gender, and race. Just 2 direct quotes from open-ended questions from that survey. In the past year, the masjid has transformed. The mosque has changed a lot with many positive changes, was another statement. So if you're interested in implementing some of these things in your own community, Dr. Ihsan Badbi is offering workshops and through ISNA to come in and help your, probably virtually now, but actually train your masjid boards and leadership and community members on how to build these kinds of welcoming, inclusive masajid in your community. We also offer a number of resources that you can access on our website at ispu.org/RMS. Okay. And you can learn more. You can join our mailing list on our website. Read more on the same RMS /RMS website that I just told you about. And you can, of course, become a supporter of our work at ispu.org/donate. And now I will stop sharing my screen so that we can have our wonderful panelists. Thank you all so much for joining us. Dr. Mattson, I'm going to start with you. Your work has been so instrumental in just even how we think about these things. What do you believe, why do you believe that this topic is of such importance today in our current moment?
Great. Thanks so much, Sister Dalia. Mashallah. I'm just very grateful for all the work that you do and that you lead with ISPU, mashallah. Let me begin by apologizing to people if there's a lot of noise in the background. I am in the middle of a forest on an island, and it's very peaceful, but also noisy. There are a lot of birds around, as well as other nature sounds. So excuse me for that. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. So let me just begin by saying that the stakes cannot be higher. The beautiful ayah that you quoted, Sister Dalia, at the beginning from Surah Tawbah, ayah 71, says that it is when the believing men and the believing women work together. I'd change your translation a little bit because it says not just perform prayers, but establish prayers, that it is upon those people upon whom Allah will have mercy. And then the verse that follows talks about the believing men and the believing women being granted paradise by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So these are the highest stakes possible for a believing community. I also want to point out a verse, an earlier verse in Surah Tawbah that talks about al-munafiquna wal-munafiqat, the hypocritical men and the hypocritical women and the kuffar, how they work together to enjoin evil and block good. So you know, there are different factions. If we are concerned about those who conspire to stop Muslims from being able to live our lifestyle, to be able to live as Muslims, to be able to establish our institutions of prayer, of charity. I mean, how many Muslim charitable organizations have we seen closed down in the last 20 years, for example? If we're concerned about that, we should see that that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us there are the those people, those Islamophobes, are men and women who are working together to accomplish that goal. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala follows it with this statement that is, when the believing men and the believing women work together, they will have Allah's mercy and will earn paradise. So this is the key. Like, very often we sit back and we wonder, why are these things happening? You know, is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala angry with us? Like, why are we having some of these problems? Why do we put our efforts in certain places and they're not going forward? Here we have a solution. And it is so evident and obvious. So this is where I want to begin by saying that if you're worried about this life and about the very practical consequences of Islamophobia, then you should be aware that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that it is by believing men and working and women working together that we will have success, inshallah, and mercy and paradise. And so it is for this life, and it is for the next life. I also want to say that there are other studies that show that have surveyed people who have left Islam. And those surveys show, the ones that I've seen, always the number one reason that people give is they believe that for leaving Islam is they say that Islam is anti-women, or Islamic teachings are misogynistic, all right? And wow, I mean, just think about that. That is so sad. This is not, you know, you can say, well, that's just propaganda. That's just, you know, they've been influenced by other people. But actually, these are people who have grown up within the Muslim community and are saying this. So what are they experiencing, right? Because it is about putting your actions behind your words. So this is not going to be, this opinion is not going to be changed by the imam standing on the khutbah, on the minbar, and saying Islam upholds the rights of women, you know. Like, how many times do we hear that? It's good, you can say that, but if we look around the community and we see that in fact women are being marginalized, women are being blocked, the language that is being given in teachings and lessons about women is frankly demeaning in many cases. If there are no role models for women, then you know, a few nice words are not going to change the opinion who actually experience an environment that is not positive to women. And really, we can't be just asking for crumbs. You know, we can't just be asking for khutbas that are not misogynistic and like a not dirty space, right? Like that's not enough. That is not the transformation we need. What's really amazing about the ayah from Surah Tawbah is it talks about the walaya of mu'minun wa mu'minat, and that expresses a equality of strength and reciprocity. So it doesn't mean women's representation. It doesn't mean, oh, we ask for one or two women to appear. It means that we have women who, of course, we're all, you know, believers, we're Muslims, we're human, we're so many other things. But as women, as a community of women, are strong and have so much to offer to the community in terms of piety and knowledge and organization. Because what is ma'ruf? Ma'ruf is such an interesting word in the Quran. It can be translated in many ways. Some people say justice, but it is based on the word urf, which is custom. And it means what the community finds good and acceptable within the broad limits of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us. So it really speaks to ma'ruf, speaks to the sentiments of the community, to the feeling of the community that, you know, this is right, this is decent, this is good. And munkar is the opposite of that. You know, someone may perform some kind of jurisprudential gymnastics to say, well, technically it's halal or technically it's not haram, but you have the whole community saying, no, this is so sketchy, this is so undignified. That is munkar, actually. So so we really need a major transformation, not just a minimal change. And finally, I want to say that the other area that this really affects is family life. We see so many problems in the Muslim community coming from either lack of the ability to support families in all of their needs, or even worse, harm caused to families by certain kinds of teaching or certain kinds of counseling. So we find people coming to, say, the imam of the masjid who has not been trained in counseling, marriage counseling, psychological, you know, all sorts of things. And maybe the community's pushing him to do that. He may or may not know his limits. Anyways, he goes ahead and does it and actually causes harm to the relationship between parents and children, between husband and wife. Even if, and this is the final thing I'll say, I believe that we really need to rethink the role of the masjid in conducting marriages, because while most masajid now and most responsible imams will absolutely insist that a couple get a civil marriage contract before they're married within the masjid, even having the marriage in the masjid then, to me, sometimes seems like a bit of a false promise. It's kind of a promise of the community and the imam that we are here behind your marriage as a Muslim community, and this marriage contract that you're signing that gives, you know, rights to everyone, this is what it means to be Islamic, and we as the mosque are signing off on that. But in fact, the imam has no power. The Muslim community has no power to enforce any of those conditions, zero. So then, you know, someone abandons his wife or you know, is abusive or whatever, and you have women coming back to the imam and saying, well, you know, the imam who married them, this is what's happening, and the imam says, well, there's nothing I can do about it. You know, I don't have any power unless he's willing to come in and you know, follow my moral teachings. I have no power over him. So there's a lot that we need to consider, and I believe that it is quite a major transformation we need in many ways. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mattson. You touched on a number of things that are so vital, and I'll just underscore two things that you said that I think are really important, that we actually have research on. So one, you said the idea of these surveys that look at people who've left Islam, and one of the reasons is the top reason is they think that Islam is discriminatory toward women. We found in our research that when we look at Muslims, now they haven't left Islam, but they have internalized Islamophobia. They endorse anti-Muslim tropes. They think they're true, right? Those folks that have internalized Islamophobia, one of the things that we found across the board is that they report having experienced gender discrimination from another Muslim. So that experience actually hurts people's faith and hurts their self-image and hurts their image of Islam. The other thing I'll add to what you said is about the last point about the role of the masjid in family life is we found that while domestic violence is reported across the board, whether you're a Muslim or you're Christian or not, or have no faith, or if you're Jewish, across the board, very similar percentages of people say that there's domestic violence occurring in their community. So that is not different across the board. Muslims are very similar to other people. But where Muslims are different is that they're more likely than any other faith community to say that the person who was the victim went to their religious leader for help. So the imam is like the first point of outreach, where if someone is being hurt in their home, they are looking to their faith leader, more than Catholics even, which I expected, when there's more of an established clergy, maybe they would, but far more than any other faith community, even ones that are much more established in their clergy, much more resourced than Muslims are. Muslims are the ones going to their religious community more often than anyone else. Now, they also go to law enforcement, so it's not either or. They're not different. Muslims and non-Muslims actually go to law enforcement at the same percentage, but Muslims are unique in that they go to their religious leaders more often, and so that underscores the need for better training and better resources if that is where people are going for help. I'm gonna now switch to Hind. So good to see you on our webinar, Hind. Thank you for joining. You have been talking and writing about this topic for so long with your side entrance, very world famous side entrance blog, and recently you authored an op-ed where you looked at how COVID-19 and some of the programming has actually been an interesting window, is an interesting door for women to start to have more of a voice in educating the community. Can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing now in this moment, in this very unique moment in our history, with both quarantine and now the reopening of mosques? What are you seeing in terms of a survey of the community, and then what are the biggest obstacles in your assessment to moving us forward to a more inclusive future?
Yeah, thank you, Dalia, for the invitation to join this really esteemed panel of people I consider my teachers and my sisters in Islam, Dr. Ingrid and Joohi, and you as well, Dalia. It's a real honor because I think that all of our work benefits from each other. Each of our work is not actually siloed. And I want to maybe, just situate the talk in a few ways. One, I think it's really important, Dalia, that both you and Dr. Ingrid, went back to the prophetic model. We are rooted, all of this work in terms of inclusion for everyone, whether it's women, whether it's minorities, converts, people with disabilities, it's all rooted in the prophetic tradition. It's all rooted in the Quranic injunctions for justice and mercy. To that, I think, and I posted a few days ago on Twitter, I think, about this panel, and somebody, a Muslim sister actually reached out and she said, this is too political. Like, your work is so political, you should focus on Islam. And I engaged with her a little bit, but, I want people to understand that this is Islam. We, especially those of us living in, societies where Muslims are religious minorities, this question of access to the mosque is really critical for a number of reasons. And several of those have already been covered by your overview of the Reimagining Muslim Spaces workshop, study, as well as Dr. Ingrid's presentation as well. But I want to first, as well, sort of mark this particular moment that we're in right now. COVID-19, at least in the United States, has hit all 50 states, and therefore has affected every single mosque and Islamic center and Muslim community, cutting across race and class, ethnicity and sect. And, I think it's really important to mention here that the majority of mosques have actually taken a financial hit. Whereas pre-COVID, 80% of mosques received their donations in person, and a lot of, from in-person events, and a lot of that happened during the month of Ramadan. This is according to Faisal Khawaja of Deen Tech. I think it's really important to know that the financial hit has really affected many mosques. Many mosques are letting imams go. They're not thinking about hiring new personnel. They're letting go of their staff. They're cutting their programs. And some mosques face a very real fear of actually closing and not being able to support their communities. Having said that, alhamdulillah, many mosques are reopening. And in my state, for example, in Illinois, they're beginning to reopen. States across the country, mosques are beginning to reopen. And as somebody mentioned in the chat, many mosques are actually restricting entry to the mosques and only allowing men between the ages of 15 to 65 to come. And this is including both Jum'ah as well as Eid prayers that happened a few weeks ago. Some mosques opened up for Eid. And in the reopening, the mosques are taking precautions, no shoulder to shoulder, no toe to toe, people bring their own mats. Some mosques have temperature taking, no wudu facilities are open. And, some of them are praying also in the parking lot, which is an important thing in terms of making sure that the disease doesn't spread if it exists. I think it's really challenging to say when mosques say that women should not come to the mosque even as they reopen. The most often cited reason they say that is that they say that it is not obligatory for women to go to pray Jum'ah or the 5 dailies at the mosque, while it is obligatory for men. Now, that doesn't explain why the Eid prayers were restricting women, because we know that in our tradition, women and children in particular are encouraged to go to Eid prayers. But I think it's really important for us as a community living as a religious minority to rethink what it means, what the role of the mosque means in our communities. And we should really rethink this position that, you know, because it is obligatory for men to pray in the mosque, the 5 dailies and the Jum'ah prayers, that does not mean necessarily that it is deprioritized for women and children to also pray the 5 dailies or the Jum'ah prayers. And that is because, you know, the mosque in societies where Muslims are minorities plays a very different role than it plays in Muslim majority societies. It's a community center, it's a mental health center, or a mental health provider. And as we just heard right now, Muslim women who are survivors of domestic violence often go to the mosque for support. It's an education center for Muslims, non-Muslims, new converts alike. It's an interfaith space. It's an activism center. I mean, so many of our mosques right now are where people are gathering to support, you know, to share their support for Black lives across the country, and also to provide, you know, needed support in terms of food and necessities for people who have been financially impacted by COVID-19. It's a space for convert care, and it's a prayer space. So if we continue to think of the mosque only as a prayer space and only a place that is most used during the Friday prayer, then we're not actually giving the mosque itself its due, and we're not giving due support to the people who attend the mosque. And as mentioned earlier, women attend the mosque in the United States with the same, you know, similar frequency as men. And after the 2016 election, Muslim women began to donate more to mosques and civil rights organizations. And so we really need to think about women as part and parcel, a prioritized member of the mosque community. And I want to think about, I want to share a little bit about, you know, side entrance. You know, I started in 2012, and as I mentioned earlier, some of the feedback at the time that I received was that it's too political, or, you know, we're airing our dirty laundry. But I think it's really important because it allows, and what it is, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is it's just a Tumblr site where I invite women and girls to share visual, you know, pictures or stories of their experiences in mosques. And what that does, you know, is it allows for the viewer, especially men, to have embodied solidarity with the women. And for a lot of men, I know it was very difficult as mosques were closed to not actually be at the mosque. And, you know, my response to them has always been, well, okay, this is how women feel many times. This is how caretakers of people who cannot go to the mosque typically feel many, many times. And so this is a time for us to have embodied solidarity with one another and say, okay, the way that our mosques were even pre-COVID, we're not providing spiritual support for everyone in the community. So how can we reimagine that? And actually somebody the other day who was over 65 mentioned that, you know, reading that people who are over 65 shouldn't go to our local mosque made them feel sad. And I thought, okay, well, you know, for women and for mothers, that is also the case. And so I also wanted to mention that one of the things that I saw in Side Entrance, and that was reiterated through the RMS study, is that, you know, women, you know, who attend U.S. mosques that generally have, you know, 2/3 of the U.S. mosques have physical barriers. They don't have a visual sight to the imam. And although most mosques, the majority of U.S. mosques, allow women to run for, you know, any position in the governing body, few do. Like the ratio is not fully equal. Yet women who are who say that they return to their mosque more frequently, they actually cite that. They cite being able to interact, engage, and visually see the imam as a reason why they return to a particular mosque. And we see even now, you know, sometimes with Zoom and online, you know, with a screen, there's a distance, there's a spiritual distance sometimes that happens. And oftentimes if you're in the women's space in the basement and the screen is working or not working, or the mic turns off, you know, that's an example of often the spiritual disconnect that many women face when they go to the mosque. And the other thing is that women often cited that, you know, when they saw women on the board or in key staff and volunteer positions, and women's programming directly, you know, directed or aimed toward women or inclusive of women, that made them want to return to the mosque time and time again. And I think it's really important here to note that, you know, there was a plethora and continues to be of online Zooms, you know, online lectures by women and for women or led by women that started even before Ramadan started, but really blossomed during the month of Ramadan and continues to this day, actually, through a lot of the anti-racism discussions. And we know for a fact that there are, you know, dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of religious scholars, subject matter experts who are women who are literally just a dial away. And so actually, I'll just end with some of my recommendations, because I think, you know, some of the obstacles that we had, especially before COVID, is the way mosques are set up physically often are built to provide support to people who come during Friday prayer. And those are majority men, and everything is built around that. But we really need to rethink and reimagine what role the mosque needs to play for all members of the society. And that, you know, the prayer is one of the most critical pieces of a mosque, but there are other events that also happen in the mosque space that need to also have space available for them. So I think just quickly, I think it's really important, and my recommendations are that mosques that have the funding, that have the, you know, financial capacity, should hire women as scholars and residents. And already a handful of mosques do that across the country. But I think that can be expanded. If you're looking to hire a youth director, why not think about hiring, you know, one of our Muslim women chaplains to be that youth director for both the boys and the girls. They should look at spaces in their programs where women in the community can offer religious programming that does not require leading a mixed gender congregational prayer. And it's really important for men and women to see women as religious leaders, as subject matter experts in our own communities. And as mosques open, they should have, or reopen, I think, during COVID, they should have a first come, first serve policy. You know, as people enter, you have maybe the capacity is 50. Once that 50th person comes in, male or female, then you shut it off. It doesn't really, to me, it doesn't make sense to allow a 70-year-old man to come to the mosque and deny a fit, healthy, younger woman also entry to the mosque just because of her gender. And at the same time, as mosques reopen, they should continue to create online religious programming for their immunocompromised members and for their at-risk members of the congregation. And we should look at what it could be to not deprioritize women's spaces, wider doors, for example, bigger spaces. If a mosque is practicing physical distancing in their prayer space, here's an idea. It's summertime in the Northern Hemisphere. How about the imam and the men pray outside and have the physical distancing in the parking lot, and allow women to pray in the men's prayer hall, which is maybe a little bit bigger than a lot of the women's prayer halls if they're separate. And to really, I think as mosques reopen, we shouldn't go back to the old model. We should really think about all of the all of the services that mosques can do and need to provide, and then rethink our space in that way. And I've definitely overstayed my time. I'm sorry to Sister Joohi, I took over some of your time, but I'm going to stop here, and inshallah, maybe during the Q&A portion, I can get into some of the other aspects of my thoughts.
Thank you so much, Hind. Some really important points. I do want to also just say that when we did our research on how to make mosques more inclusive, the question we did ask was, tell us the best experience you've ever had in a mosque. It was an appreciative inquiry type approach So we weren't asking people to give us their laundry list of problems. We're actually asking them to describe what it looked like when things worked. And that's how we came up with our recommendation. So you're absolutely right. It was what people said, you know, I could see the imam. I had access to the imam. It was very simple things that I think most men would just take for granted. That's just normal, you know. But for women, that was a description of what a mosque was like when it was great, when it was working really well. So Joohi, it's so good to have you with us. You are the executive director of Muhsen. It's a unique and badly needed organization that certifies mosques for their inclusivity of people with disabilities. Now, what does that have to do with women, right? The answer is that women are oftentimes the caretakers, the caregivers of children with disabilities or other family members. And when people with disabilities are excluded, women are also excluded. So we want to hear from you, Joohi, and we want to hear about what mosques can do better to include every member of our community.
Sure. Assalamu alaikum. And I just want to really thank ISPU for including me on this panel. I'm learning a lot, as I'm hoping to be able to share with all of you also from kind of the unique perspective. For those of you who don't know Muhsen, it's exactly that. It's a project of Ihsan. We strive to make our masjids more inclusive. And what's so beautiful about this discussion today is it puts us all in a place of empathy. And I think one of the most amazing learning experiences that you know, a lot of us have gone through during this time, especially during the shutdown, during the pandemic, has been we've realized how important the mosque is to us. Many of us, my family included, people with family members with special needs, yearn to go into the masjid. And for those who have that opportunity all the time now, that opportunity has been taken away for all of us. And so this discussion is important for caregivers of special needs. It's important for women. It's important for men. It's important for the masjid leadership to understand that it is our chance to kind of do it over. It is our chance now to reopen with that in mind. And I'm just going to share a really quick story before I jump into some of the points I wanted to make. Someone I was speaking with very recently said, and shared the story of a masjid that some of you may know in Edmonton, Canada. It was like one of the first masjids to even be established in Canada. There were a group of women, a small group of women, who saw that the mayor had this lot of land for sale in Edmonton. And this was in the mid-1930s, mind you. They collected up $5,000, these women, and not just from their own households. This is what's so beautiful, from Jews and Christians and other Muslim brothers and sisters. And they paid the mayor and they bought that lot of land for $5,000. That today, and that was the beginning of a now thriving community out there. Why is this important that I mention the story? It's amazing that, number one, it was, remember now, the women who believed in community. The women wanted to see a place, a center, as my co-panelists have mentioned. It's not just a place to pray. It's a place to raise your children. It's a place to go for comfort and solace, as in the time of the Sunnah of our Prophet ﷺ. So what I loved about hearing about this was these women knew, they were visionaries, and they knew that the future for their families centered around having this type of community. And so that was just kind of a side story that I wanted to share. But culturally, yes, and to address what Sister Dalia mentioned, caregivers have been and still are predominantly women. The CDC reports 22% of households in America live with someone with special needs. That's almost 1 in 4 people. That's everywhere. Muslims are not immune to that number. And to add to that, and this is an element that I know when Dr. Mattson kind of went there, it suddenly reminded me that I was going to speak about this. Muslim women today, the numbers of single Muslim women are emerging. Abandonment is at an all-time high. Do I have a number, a statistic? I don't. Inshallah, we'll have some research done with ISPU, I hope, in the future. But Muslim women are oftentimes the sole caregiver to a family member with special needs. They are being faced with this challenge on their own. And we know that access is important to these women, but it's that open-mindedness And it's also, having programming that's relevant. So it's not just the physical space that we're talking about, and a place where they can voice their concerns in order to make the masjid more welcoming. And what I mean is a space for that individual that they're a caregiver for. So it can be a child, it can be an adult, it can be an adult child, it can be someone that they are just truly responsible for. And so when we talk about masjid spaces and we talk about a babysitting room, I always say it goes so much further than a babysitting room. What about that woman who's coming in the mosque, bringing her adult child now who's in their 30s, and that she needs that spiritual connection to the masjid, but because that adult child is not considered a baby, it would be very odd to be in a babysitting room. So I would stress that our masjids and our communities rethink this space. As an advocate for this community, I would say, could we have just a family room? Could we have our masjids consider, a quiet room? We do have those rooms that aren't used sometimes, and this would be ideal for a person who has someone who's caregiving to an adult. And remember, I'm not talking about the isolated 1 or 2 persons. I'm talking about 600,000 Muslims in America who are living like this. The gender issue comes up. So our masjids are known for their segregated spaces, and correctly so. However, remember now, if you are someone who's caregiving to someone with the opposite gender, and you need to be at Eid Salah because it's Eid and you deserve to be. Well, if you walk into the women's section and you have someone of the opposite gender with you who's slightly older, you're going to get those stares. And our families tell us they're made to feel very unwelcome. So what can we do to understand that as these male children will grow older and the father is out of the picture in many cases, where do they go? We need to plan for these community members, and our masjids need to be welcoming to them, while adhering, obviously, to the religious rulings and not making others feel uncomfortable. Program timings, that's something I wanted to touch on. Our community members with loved ones with special needs often can't attend evening programming. They would need the respite care. They need somebody to be taking care of their loved one when they're not in school or they're not in a program. And unless our communities can start providing that space or that type of program, which again is something that Muhsen advocates for, and alhamdulillah we've started, that person is excluded from that programming. Oftentimes women are the ones that are left out. So the husband might go to the monthly dinner or to the guest speaker talk, and oftentimes it's the woman that's excluded. Personally, I love the online programming we've all just experienced because it's been wonderful for a lot of these people that I mentioned. We heard from the study about, women's committees. Women's committees are so important. I'm fortunate to live in a community where there is a women's committee, and they do take the opinions of women. Now, having that role on the committee and being able to volunteer, again, a bit of a challenge for those with loved ones with special needs. However, it's not an excuse. I think we can make the space, and I think we can give that voice to that person on the table. Oftentimes, I would want to volunteer and I would want to do great work that my masjid community is doing, but I'm unable to attend because I have to be that primary caregiver at home. How can I still have that voice? How can our masjids know that we exist? Maybe take into consideration, what is the special needs accommodation needed at the next carnival that we're gonna have in our parking lot? What is the special needs accommodation that's needed during Ramadan? Maybe someone can be that advocate and be on the women's committee and talk about those needs, because who's gonna know it best but people who are living it? And that support is needed, remember, at home. And so many people are missing out on that whole volunteering experience. And that's a voice missing at the table. So I speak for those people who could be a real asset and who could really bring a different kind of opinion. It's really funny, and I was going to share this. I won't name the organization, but to have a voice at the table, it was the night before Ramadan, and I got a text message to speak in a series that was coming up in Ramadan. And remember, it was the night before Ramadan. And there were 28 nights booked with male speakers. And I was asked if I would join onto this program during Ramadan, and could they put my name in for one date? And I found it actually comical because I said, wow, you know, they went through and they planned 28 nights worth of speakers and they were all male. And then they suddenly realized the night before when they had to go to print that they didn't have a female. And they said, well, sister, you'd bring diversity. So we thought of you. And as kind as it was that they invited, I thought to myself, where is that intentional planning, that strategy that goes into, we want your voice, not just, oh, we should really put it in. So I just wanted to throw that in. But one more key ask that, you know, we actually at Muhsen, we do survey our families, and mashallah, we have over 700 respondents. And one of the questions in our needs survey was, what kind of programming would you need and what kind of services? And one of the things that came up, and again, Dr. Mattson touched on it earlier, the need for support and counseling. And 82% of the people that Muhsen surveyed said that they would attend and they would like a faith-based, culturally sensitive support group for people to, you know, and they said it could be based at the masjid, which was so interesting to me. These are people who have been alienated from the masjid, yet we want to come back. Yet we want that place and we want that spiritual connection. And it was interesting because they said they wanted a peer group, and they wanted professionals where they could help process the grief and the isolation and the emotions that they go through. And so, you know, this could be their entryway back into the community. We hear about convert support groups, we hear about youth support groups. How about a caregiver support group? And that system, which is something now Mogahed has initiated as part of our masjid certification program, that is, I think, another way that so many of these women, majority women, could come back. And we've seen it over the years when we've had these types of groups and workshops, that people will come back in the masjid and they say, wow, I have not been here in years. And to make the space for them that's relevant programming for them, to have it be at a convenient time for them. These are the types of things I think we need to think about, whether it's for women, whether it's for any other marginalized group, whether it's for caregivers. And I do believe that through this experience of having gone through the shutdown and the pandemic, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching us, was really teaching us all how to be empathetic and how to understand what's truly important to building that role model society. And inshallah, through discussions like these, we can all find ourselves kind of rethinking these spaces and being more welcoming and being more empathetic towards the needs of these different types of groups. And I look forward to, you know, seeing more research coming from ISPU. I look forward to your questions. And with that, I'll hand it back over. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Joohi. And we are actually doing research on Muslims with disabilities and their needs, and so we're very interested in partnering with Muhsen, inshallah, to really put some attention on this vital and urgent issue that we've been ignoring, I think, for far too long. Unfortunately, we are out of time, so we will not be able to go to Q&A. I want to thank the panelists for your wisdom and your knowledge. We'll be sending out a recording of this webinar, as well as other resources from ISPU, as well as organizations that the panelists represent. Thank you very much for your attention. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.